October 17th, 1596. A messenger walks through the cold corridors of El Escorial Palace near Madrid. He carries a sealed letter addressed to the banking houses of Genoa. Inside that envelope is a single sentence that will collapse the European credit system. We think Spain fell because England defeated the Armada. We think the Spanish Empire declined because of military losses and Protestant rebellions. We're wrong. Spain didn't lose because of war. Spain lost because a man who owned half the planet couldn't balance a ledger. This is the story of Philip II, the king who declared bankruptcy 9 times, while silver from his mines could fill cathedrals. This is the story of how the richest empire on earth died from insolvency. Picture Spain in 1556. The streets of Seville are paved with gold coins. Galleons arrive twice a year, carrying silver bars stacked like firewood. The Spanish flag flies over Mexico, Peru, the Philippines, the Netherlands, and half of Italy. The sun never sets on this empire. Church bells ring across 4 continents in Philip's name. He controls more territory than Rome ever did. He owns the world's largest supply of precious metals. And yet, when you open the books, when you look at the actual balance sheet, you see something terrifying. The empire is broke, not struggling, not stretched thin, completely insolvent. The interest payments alone consume more than the total tax revenue. But nobody knows this yet. The facade is still magnificent. Philip II inherits this beautiful disaster from his father, Emperor Charles V. Charles spent his entire life fighting wars across Europe. Wars against France. Wars against the Ottoman Turks. Wars against Protestant heretics. Each war was financed by loans from German banking families like the Fuggers of Augsburg. Charles borrowed millions of ducats, promising to pay them back with American silver. When Charles abdicates in 1556, he's a broken shell of a man. He retreats to a monastery to die. He leaves Philip 2 things, an empire and a mountain of debt. The debt is already so large that 70% of Spain's annual income goes straight to interest payments. Philip doesn't inherit a fortune. He inherits a subprime mortgage on a global scale. But Philip has a secret weapon, or so he thinks. In the mountains of Potosí in modern Bolivia, Spanish conquistadors have discovered something extraordinary. A mountain made almost entirely of silver. The largest deposit of precious metal ever found in human history. Indigenous workers are enslaved by the tens of thousands. They're forced into the mines where they die from exhaustion, mercury poisoning, and collapsed tunnels. The silver is extracted at a horrifying human cost. It's melted into bars, stamped with the royal seal, and loaded onto ships. Once a year, the treasure fleet sails from Havana to Seville. When those ships arrive, the docks groan under tons of bullion. Philip sees this river of silver and makes a fatal assumption. He assumes the river will never run dry. This assumption is his original sin. Because Philip believes his income is infinite, he spends like there's no tomorrow. His first act as king is to continue his father's war against France. He assembles a massive army in the Netherlands. In 1557, his forces crush the French at the Battle of St. Quentin. It's a glorious victory. The road to Paris lies open. But victory costs money. Soldiers need wages. Suppliers demand payment. And the bankers who finance the army want their interest. Philip looks at his treasury. It's empty. The silver fleet has been delayed by storms. Tax revenues have been spent 3 years in advance. The most powerful man on earth is insolvent. On September 1st, 1557, just 1 year after taking the throne, Philip declares bankruptcy. It's the first sovereign default in modern European history. Philip doesn't call it bankruptcy, of course. Kings don't go bankrupt. He calls it a suspension of payments. He issues a royal decree converting all short-term loans into long-term bonds called juros. The short-term loans carried interest rates of 14 to 18%. They were supposed to be paid back within months. Bankers relied on that cash flow to pay their own creditors. By converting them into bonds paying 3 to 5% over 50 years, Philip is committing financial murder. It's a legal theft. The Fugger banking house, which financed the Habsburgs for 2 generations, is crippled overnight. Anton Fugger writes desperate letters to his agents across Europe. He realizes the Habsburgs are a black hole. German banking dominance begins to crumble. A new group of predators smells blood. The Genoese bankers are different from the Germans. They're harder, colder, more calculating. They look at Philip's bankruptcy and see opportunity. They know he needs money to keep his empire running. They know he can't survive without credit, so they offer him new loans at even higher interest rates with brutal conditions. They demand control over Spain's salt mines and sales taxes as collateral. They become the repo men of the empire. Philip accepts their terms. He has no choice. He has wars to fight. And the biggest war of his life is just beginning. In the northern part of his empire, 17 wealthy provinces called the Netherlands are becoming Protestant. Philip is a devout Catholic who sees Protestantism as a disease. He introduces the Spanish Inquisition to the Low Countries. He burns heretics at the stake. In 1566, the Dutch revolt. Philip sends the Duke of Alba with an army of 10,000 veterans. Alba is a monster. He sets up a tribunal called the Council of Blood. He executes thousands of people, including the highest nobles in the land. He imposes a new tax called the 10th penny, demanding 10% of every transaction. The tax destroys the Dutch economy and unites the people against Spain. The revolt becomes the 80 Years' War. For Philip, this war is a financial black hole. The Netherlands are thousands of miles from Spain. To get soldiers there, he marched them along a route called the Spanish Road through Italy and Germany. Every mile costs gold. The soldiers need food, boots, gunpowder, and wages. Spanish soldiers are the best in the world, but they're mercenaries. They fight for pay, not patriotism. If the pay doesn't arrive, they stop fighting, and the pay rarely arrives on time. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire is expanding westward. Turkish fleets raid the coasts of Italy and Spain. They capture Christian ships and enslave thousands. Philip sees himself as the defender of Christendom. He pours millions of ducats into building a navy. In 1571, he assembles the Holy League fleet. Under his half-brother Don John of Austria, the fleet meets the Turks at the Battle of Lepanto. It's the largest naval battle in history. Hundreds of ships smash into each other. The sea turns red with blood. Spain wins a crushing victory. The Ottoman fleet is destroyed. Philip is hailed as the hero of Europe. But victory doesn't bring money. It brings bills. The fleet must be repaired. Sailors must be paid, and the Dutch are still rebelling. Philip is spending silver before it even arrives in Seville. He's taking payday loans to run an empire. By 1575, the situation is critical. The debt has ballooned beyond control. The Genoese bankers refuse to lend more money. They close their purses. On September 1st, 1575, Philip declares his second bankruptcy. He suspends payments to the bankers again. He cancels the licenses of Genoese merchants, preventing them from doing business in Spain. He tries to bully them into submission. It's a game of chicken. Philip thinks he can force the bankers to bend, but he forgets that his army in the Netherlands is waiting for their wages. The result is one of the greatest atrocities of the 16th century. The Spanish soldiers haven't been paid for 18 months. They're starving and furious. When news of the bankruptcy arrives, they realize no money is coming. They snap. They decide to pay themselves. In November 1576, the Spanish army marched on Antwerp. Antwerp is the richest city in northern Europe, the commercial capital of the world. The Spanish soldiers storm the gates. They burn houses. They murder men. They rape women. They torture merchants to find where gold is hidden. It's called the Spanish Fury. 7,000 citizens are massacred in 3 days. The city is reduced to a smoking ruin. The sack of Antwerp destroys the commercial heart of the Netherlands. It sends a wave of horror through Europe. It also destroys any chance of Philip winning Dutch loyalty. Before the sack, many Catholics in the Netherlands supported the king. After the sack, everyone unites against the Spanish monsters. The bankruptcy of 1575 cost Philip his reputation and his grip on the north. He eventually reaches a deal with the bankers, but the damage is permanent. You'd think 2 catastrophic bankruptcies would teach Philip a lesson. You'd think he'd cut spending, end the wars, and balance his books. But Philip isn't a man who compromises. He's a man of absolute conviction. He believes he's doing God's work and that God will provide. He sees the bankruptcies not as policy failures, but as tests of faith. So instead of shrinking his ambitions, he expands them. In 1580, the King of Portugal dies without an heir. Philip is the closest relative. He invades Portugal and crowns himself king. This is the peak of his power. He now controls the Portuguese Empire, including Brazil, the African coast, and the Spice Islands of Indonesia. He controls both Atlantic and Pacific trade routes. He's the master of the oceans. But new territory brings new costs. The Portuguese Empire is under attack by Dutch and English pirates. Philip has doubled his assets, but tripled his liabilities. And then there's England. Queen Elizabeth I is a Protestant heretic who supports the Dutch rebels. She sends them money and soldiers. She allows pirates like Francis Drake to attack Spanish treasure fleets. Drake raids Cadiz and steals silver from galleons. He's humiliating the greatest king on earth. Philip decides to deal with England once and for all. He begins planning the enterprise of England. We know it as the Spanish Armada. It will be the greatest invasion force ever assembled. 130 ships carrying 30,000 soldiers. They'll sail up the English Channel, link with the Spanish army in the Netherlands, and land in Kent. They'll capture Elizabeth and restore Catholicism to England. The cost of the Armada is astronomical. It requires deforestation of entire regions to build ships. It requires thousands of cannons. It requires tons of food and gunpowder. Philip micromanages every detail from his small room in El Escorial. He counts barrels of wine and pounds of powder. To pay for it, he drains the treasury. He borrows every penny from the Genoese at ruinous rates. He begs the Pope for a subsidy. He squeezes Spanish taxpayers until they bleed. He bets the entire empire on this single gamble. He believes it cannot fail because it's a crusade. In 1588, the Armada sets sail. It's a magnificent sight, a floating city of castles. But from the moment it leaves port, things go wrong. The food rots because the barrels were made from green wood. The water goes bad, and the English are waiting with faster ships and better guns. They harass the Armada up the channel. Then come the fire ships off Calais. The Spanish formation breaks. The fleet scatters. And then the wind. The Protestant wind blows them north around Scotland and Ireland. The Armada is smashed against the rocks. Half the ships are lost. Thousands of men drown. When the news reaches Philip, he doesn't rage. He stares at the wall and whispers, "I sent my ships to fight men, not the winds and waves of God." But the bankers aren't interested in the winds of God. They want their money. The Armada cost 10 million ducats. That money is now at the bottom of the ocean. The investment is a total loss. Philip is aging. He's sick with gout. His great gamble has failed. His debts are mounting. The silver is still arriving, but it's not enough to plug the hole. The bankers are circling like vultures. But Philip cannot stop. He's trapped in a prison of his own making, a prison built of gold and debt, and he's about to make his worst decision yet. In the 1590s, France tears itself apart in civil war between Catholics and Protestants. The Protestant leader, Henry of Navarre, is winning. Philip is terrified of a Protestant king on his border, so he orders his army to invade France. This is strategic suicide. By diverting troops, he gives the Dutch rebels a chance to retake territory. He's now fighting on 3 fronts: the Netherlands, the Atlantic, and France. Spain is paying for an army in the north, a navy at sea, and a proxy war in France. The expenditure is 3 times the crown's total income. To keep the machine running, Philip resorts to desperate tricks. He debases the currency. For centuries, Spanish silver coins were the standard of Europe. But inside Spain, Philip introduces vellon, a copper coin with a trace of silver. It's junk money used to pay local bills, while real silver goes to bankers and armies. This causes massive inflation. The price of bread skyrockets. The poor starve. The middle class is wiped out. But Philip doesn't care about the domestic economy. He cares about the geopolitical game. The Spanish people are just pawns to be sacrificed. The Genoese bankers now control Spain. They collect the taxes. They dictate the terms. They know Philip is insolvent, but they keep lending because the interest rates are so high it's worth the risk. They create a bubble of paper debt floating above the Spanish economy, but bubbles always burst. In 1596, the inevitable happens. The silver fleet is smaller than expected. The wars in France drag on with no victory. The English sack Cadiz, burning another Spanish fleet in the harbor. Philip reaches into his treasury and finds nothing. Not a single ducat. On November 29, 1596, Philip declares his 3rd bankruptcy. This time he doesn't just suspend payments. He decrees that the loans are illegal. He claims the bankers charged usurious interest rates, and therefore he has no obligation to pay them back. It's royal theft on a continental scale. He seizes revenues pledged to the bankers. He confiscates silver belonging to private merchants. He nationalizes the financial system to save his regime. The banking houses of Genoa shake. Many collapse. The credit of Spain is completely destroyed. No one in Europe will lend Spain money without physical collateral. The bankruptcy of 1596 marks the end of the Spanish Golden Age. It paralyzes the army. Spanish troops in the Netherlands mutiny again for lack of pay. The mutiny allows the Dutch leader Maurus of Nassau to capture key cities. Spanish dominance in the north is broken forever. In France, Henry of Navarre converts to Catholicism, saying, "Paris is worth a mass," and unites the country against Spain. Philip's intervention has failed. He spent millions to stop a Protestant king, only to see that king convert and defeat him anyway. Philip is now an old man. He's dying. He spends his final years rotting in bed at El Escorial. He suffers from terrible ulcers and gout. He's in constant agony. As he lies dying, he looks at the accounts of his kingdom. He sees the ruin he's caused. He inherited a debt of 20 million ducats. He's leaving a debt of 100 million ducats. He has taxed his subjects into poverty. He has wasted the wealth of the Indies. He summons his son, the future Philip III, to his bedside. He tells him, "I meant to leave you a rich kingdom, but I leave you a poor one." It's a rare moment of honesty. On September 13th, 1598, Philip II dies holding a crucifix in the dark stone room he built. But his death doesn't end the story. It just marks the beginning of a long, slow collapse. The story of Philip's bankruptcies isn't just about one man's bad decisions. It's about a fundamental economic paradox. How could the owner of the silver mines be poor? How could the nation with the most money have the worst economy? Economists today call this the resource curse or Dutch disease, although in this case it should be called Spanish disease. The influx of silver from the Americas was supposed to make Spain rich. Instead, it destroyed Spanish industry. Because silver was so plentiful in Spain, prices were high. Spanish goods like wool and cloth became expensive compared to goods from England or France. It was cheaper for a Spaniard to buy cloth made in London than cloth made in Toledo. So the silver didn't stay in Spain. It flowed right through Spain like water through a sieve. The silver went to English merchants, French manufacturers, and Italian bankers. Spain became a funnel. They did the hard work of mining and transporting the silver across the ocean. But the rest of Europe kept it. The Spanish economy became hollow. They stopped making things. They neglected agriculture. They relied entirely on the treasure fleet. While England and the Dutch Republic were building industries, creating joint stock companies, and developing modern banking systems, Spain was just spending cash. They were like a lottery winner who buys fancy cars and big houses, but never invests in a business. When the cash stopped flowing, they had no income to fall back on. The bankruptcies of 1557, 1575, 1596, and the later ones in 1607, 1627, 1647, and 1653 were milestones of decline. Each one ruined the credit of the state. Each one forced the king to sign away more sovereignty to foreign creditors.